What was the "I'm fired, aren't I" moment you experienced or witnessed? I worked at Roche as a security guard for a while. One day I was walking the floor of the manufacturing area and was asked to accompany a guy to get a roll of palladium. Palladium was used to make the test strips that go into blood glucose meters. It's an insanely expensive metal and comes in rolls that cost, at the time, around $100,000 each. I walked with him to get it, and while he was getting the roll off the shelf something happened, and 3 rolls fell into another shelf and a lot of rolls cascaded to the floor. This ruined them. The total damage was almost $1 million. He wanted to leave right then and avoid the firing, but I convinced him he might not get fired since it was an accident. He was gone the next day. My best friend and I worked together for years at a small sandwich shop. One day we were closing together and we were talking some match about our manager, just ripping into the guy. We said what we said, had our laugh as we finished ranting, and I mockingly turned around and said, "Oh, hey, manager's name," as if he had been there listening to us the whole time. From down the hall we hear, "How do you know I was here? I just walked through the door." Cue us both shying ourselves at how close we cut it. I worked at a pizza shop in college as a delivery driver on weekend nights. On this particular weekend, it was one of the biggest sport events of the year and we were slammed. The manager on duty had just switched roles in the company from being a driver, and it was his first day acting in that capacity. Having anticipated a rush for the event, we had hired on 3 new employees that also started that week, so they had no idea what they were doing. We were located fairly close to the stadium too, so traffic was nuts. All of this culminated in a lot of messed up orders and deliveries running up to almost 2 hours late. Of course the new people on the phones keep instinctively telling people 30 minutes or less instead of a more realistic time frame. All my customers are pissed. I'm moving as fast as I can, running crazy 6 or 7 stop runs, and probably getting stiffed on about half of my orders. I understand why the customers were pissed, getting things an hour late, but I'm still mad they took it out on me as a driver, having only had maybe 15 minutes handling their food before getting it to them. So I show up to one of the last deliveries on my route to a crummy apartment on the rundown side of town. As I approach the door, a woman out front belts out, "It's about effing time." So I already know about how this one is going to go. I'm pretty exhausted from a day of abuse already, so I just try to apologize for the wait, keep things civil and handle the transaction, and that's about where shit hits the fan. I tell her the total for the order, which is $17 and some change. She hands me a $20. So I ask if she wants change and she does. So I hand her $2. Now she gets hostile. I explain to her that I don't carry coins and can't give her back the 30 some odd cents that she expects back. That's when she calls me a thief. When I refuted, she started saying how she was going to have me fired and how I should be ashamed of stealing from her and all this I finally just snapped. I started just berating the woman, screaming obscenities, insults, and curses at her. Her husband came out and joined in the shouting match, so of course I chewed him out too. I put together vulgarities in ways I didn't realize were possible and basically insulted them both, like it was a Comedy Central roast. I made my way back to my car, and in the strangest mix of emotions I've ever experienced, I was cackling and crying at the same time. After just a minute or two back on the road, I get a call from the new manager guy asking if I just took a delivery to that person's house and what happened. I give a brief explanation, and he asks me to finish my run and come back to the store as soon as possible to discuss it more thoroughly. That's it, I'm sure. I'm so fired. When I get back, he tells me that the lady said I threatened her with a knife, which definitely wasn't true. I told them I don't even have a knife or a weapon at all, and we basically end up laughing that off. They thought the lady was just crazy and exaggerating everything. Of course I never admitted to the cursing and what have you, but since she went so far with the accusations, they just took my word over hers. At the end of the night, the new manager comes up to me and says I don't see any reason the head manager needs to hear about this. I didn't even receive so much as a written warning. And I'm not going to lie, as mean as I was to that lady, it felt really good to let it out like that and get out unscathed. I used to work in a warehouse right after high school. Not knowing how everything worked, and it being my first real full-time job, I just did what I was told and tried my best to impress the bosses. One day in the packaging room, someone had thrown a screwdriver out of anger, and it stuck into the drywall. Out of hilarity, my manager bet the guy 2 gas station taquitos he couldn't do it again. This became a daily thing around lunchtime. Everyone would gather around and throw screwdrivers at the wall, and whoever's didn't stick had to buy lunch. Well, this was right over a $8,000 heat shrink machine. And guess who accidentally hit the control panel, breaking the machine? Well, one day one of the owners came back looking for something specific and noticed the bludgeoned wall. Looks at all of us, owner, so you guys have been throwing screwdrivers at the wall? Me, hangs head, yes owner, that's cool, walks away, never got fired. He was extremely pissed about the machine I had broke though. He ended up just buying a better one. I used to work at a lumber yard back in the late 80s. A guy that worked across the street kept parking in a spot on the property that was reserved for an elderly gentleman who worked the gate and was with the company for 50 years. The guy was told dozens of times to not park there, but kept doing it. One day the nephew of the old man lost it and took one of the heavy-duty forklifts and picked the car up and dumped it across the street. We all sat there with our jaws open, and the dude just parked the forklift, grabbed his lunch pail, shook hands with the foreman and walked out. No words were exchanged. He knew he was fired but didn't care. My non-disclosure is expired now, so back in 2010, 21-year-old me built and managed a website for a Slim Jim campaign that they were doing in conjunction with the WWE. Basically, you took a picture of yourself and friends with Slim Jims weekly after SmackDown and texted it into a shortcode, and you would get points. Most points won some sort of prize and got featured in an ad on TV during wrestling. Anyway, it was sort of buggy-ish dealing with MMSs back then, so if people complained, we would manually update their points in the database. On a Friday morning, after being heavily advertised during SmackDown the previous night, I was updating a complainer's account and fed a query. Instead of setting one account's points, I set every record in the database to the same points count. Yeah, nothing more intelligent than working on a live DB from command line for a multi-million-dollar campaign. But I was 21 and they let me do it. Oh, and the DB backups were 24 hours old and missing thousands of transactions. I thought for sure I was fired. We restored from backup, and I was able to manually set the leaderboard points, since that was still cached in memcached. They swept it under the rug and never told Conogram. I worked for them for another year after that, and we had many more campaigns for Conogram. Edit. It was 2010. Just checked. Also, congrats Team Biznitches on winning all those years ago with 13,650 points. I hope your life has been fruitful since then. When I was a kid, there was a van that used to come and pick us all up from school and take us to daycare. One day all the daycare kids loaded up onto the van and the driver told us that we weren't going to daycare. We were going to her house. Apparently her 12-year-old daughter had been told not to get on the school bus that day, but to get on the daycare van. She disobeyed and got on the school bus anyway. Her mom was pissed and wanted to meet the school bus at their house to catch her daughter. So while she sat waiting for an hour for the bus to arrive with her daughter, we got to play on her trampoline in the backyard, while all of our parents were trying to figure out why our van hadn't ever gotten to the daycare. She eventually loaded us up into the van with her daughter and drove us back to the daycare, where police were waiting and parents were crying. It was then that realization dawned on her face that perhaps that wasn't the best thing to do. She lost her job that day. Happened at my last workplace. My colleague needed a specific washing machine for a customer. We had a pretty small warehouse for our stuff, and it was around Christmas time. So you can imagine how much stuff we got in there on top of each other. Anyway, the washing machines were stacked up on top of each other, and the one he needed was right at the edge of something that was similar to a pyramid. The gets the forklifter, and he aims directly at it without thinking about moving the machines on top of it. As you can already imagine, the whole thing collapsed, and he basically destroyed a bunch of washing machines, TVs and some other stuff. Our boss rushed in the warehouse and you could tell by the face of my colleague that it said, "I'm fired, right?" I started my evening warehouse job right before Thanksgiving. I needed this job too. It was a great blessing to get it. I was newly married, 1 year, and had a baby girl. We made hardly anything, and this job was literally an answer to prayer. After a few weeks I finally received my forklift certification. I was trying to turn in a tight spot and accidentally broke the rear light housing off the forklift. Not wanting to hide it, I immediately told my coworkers, and they said don't sweat it. Just tell the supervisor. You'll probably get your hand slapped, but that's easy to replace. So I went to my supervisor to tell him. He looked at me with a straight face and said, "You're fired." I just wanted to make sure he wasn't kidding. I had a sinking suspicion that he wasn't, so I asked if he was serious. He then said, "Yes, a safety violation in your probation period." I started to walk away to the locker room devastated. He called me back and said, "You're not fired, thanks for telling me." That one hurt. But I have been with the company now 8 years and worked my way into a corporate role. Like and subscribe for more Reddit videos.